How do we know the moral boundaries of life? How do we know? If you live in a place where no one has told you, don't do that, that's going to hurt somebody, how would you know? We only know because people tell us. And even when they tell us, we don't really know. We only begin to know when we can start to feel how the other person might feel.
Light and dark, life and death, opposites imposed by the universe itself. But what of good and evil? Are these ideas humans have just created for themselves? Or are they a fundamental part of the universe, perhaps like north and south? Is there something which draws the needle of human nature, telling us good from bad, giving humanity a moral compass?
There's something about genuine moral truths which exerts a pull on us, which exerts a demand on us, whether we like it or not.
But what if there is no moral north and south, no moral compass? What would direct us then?
We are driven by the same emotions of guilt and shame and anger and fear. There are no fundamental moral values.
If ideas of good and bad are just invented and then folded into us, different from culture to culture, would this mean that the only arbiter of right and wrong would be mere preference or force? In this last film of our series, Oxford physicist and Christian Ard Louis and filmmaker and non-believer David Malone ask where moral beliefs come from. And in a world of atoms and molecules, what authority can moral ideas really have?
If we take scientism really seriously, so that you and I are nothing but atoms and molecules, then in that case, we may think that we have access to morals that are outside of ourselves, but they're nothing more than a convention.
And what do you not like about that?
Well, because I think once you start from the premise that we're nothing but atoms and molecules, then the idea that humans have equal value independent of, what tribe they're from or what family they were born in or what color they are, you have got no real way of justifying that.
I think we worry less about whether they're true in any absolute sense and say, yeah, but is it a good idea? Does it provide you with a sense of meaning and purpose? And if it does, then that's a value that's separate from whether it's true.
You're saying that basically...
I'm saying there are true things, untrue things, and then a whole load of stuff which are neither. They're neither true nor untrue, but I would say they're some of the most important things about life.
So I would say something slightly different. I'd say...
You didn't like that at all.
I didn't like that. I don't like that
at all. See the fluffometer going...
No, because I think there's a difference between saying things aren't true or not true, or our ability to know whether they are true or untrue.
There's something maddeningly fluffy about half of what David says. He just doesn't seem to get that for moral beliefs to have any real force, they have to be grounded in something that gives them a more lasting authority than just what your culture happens to think.
Professor Alex Rosenberg, a leading proponent of scientism, believes that the only basis for knowledge is what science alone can tell us. Not surprisingly, he has no time for David or Ard's views about the nature of morality.
There are no fundamental moral values. But The nihilism which I embrace or endorse is nice in this sense of how it is that we human beings could have evolved to be cooperative, empathetic, and altruistic creatures. In fact, we would never have survived having been thrown out of the rainforest into the African savanna on the bottom of the food chain. We never would have survived, let alone moved ourselves right up to the top of the food chain in only a matter of a couple of 100,000 years, if we hadn't had certain features, the tendency to cooperate with one another that's required by the division of labor and by the coordination of activities of people with one another. And those behavioral dispositions are so deeply written into our evolutionary history that now we are all, except for the small number of psychopaths among us, pretty nice people, easy to get along with, because we are driven, like everybody else, by the same emotions of guilt and shame and anger and fear, which make us all pretty decent, moral people.
So do you think...
That's the nice part.
That's the nice part. So do you think cooperation is part of the evolutionary story?
Absolutely, it had to have been.
Of course, we are all capable of being nice. But we don't all agree on when we should be nice, or who will be nice too.
Oh, that's Malcolm X. That was taken in Tuskegee in 1965.
Were you there?
Yes. And that's when he came down with the ballot or the bullet.
Which would you have chosen? Or which one did you choose?
I chose the ballot.
For Dr. Gwen Patton, growing up in the racially segregated America of the 1950s, it was very clear that there were limits to the idea that people are nice, because people made very different choices about who they would be nice to.
I'm 8 years old. It's 1952. I will never forget it. And every Sunday after Sunday school and church, the treat for my brother, my first cousin Al, and me was to ride the entire bus line to the end of the route and come back. Okay. And Mommy always told us to sit on the back long seat and look out the big back window and see the world going backwards. That was such a wonder. I never knew we couldn't sit in the front of the bus. So one Sunday, I decided we would stop downtown at the Court Square to get an ice cream. And I wanted a cup of water. And I just sat on the counter stool to drink my water. And the soda jerk, which is not a pun, called me a pickaninny and told me to get up. Now, I never heard of the word pickaninny. But I knew it was an insult. And I poured my cup of water on the counter.
You were 8 years old?
I'm 8 years old.
Okay.
And we stamp out of there, come home, and Mommy would always be at the bus stop to greet us, to meet us. And I told Mommy about it. Why would she say this to me? I'm a little girl. So Mommy then had to tell me we couldn't ride in the front of the bus and all of what the mores were. And I wanted to know why. And now we got the Montgomery bus boycott. Yeah, we refused to get on the bus. We walked everywhere.
How did you feel when the bus boycott started?
Oh, I was just absolutely electrified. We're going to win this.
You already knew you were going to win?
Yeah, we were going to win this.
You just thought, it's wrong, and that's why, and we're right, and we're going to win.
Well, you're bringing in the moral dimension. You have to remember that the church is very much a part of the coalition. And we were moving towards liberation theology with Dr. King.
So do you think that from Dr. King and others, the idea that we're all created equal was really important?
Yes, we're all God's children. When the bus boycott ended, And I get on the bus with my maternal grandmother, and she always went to the back. And I would always sit up front, because I thought that was the victory. And so one time, there were no white people on the bus. And I decided I'd go all the way in the back and sit with Mommy. And I finally asked Mommy, I said, Mommy, why do you sit in the back of the bus? And she said, Gwendolyn, it was not about sitting next to white people on the bus or even sitting in the front of the bus. It was about sitting anywhere you please.
Gwen's story tells me that just claiming we are nice is simply not enough. I mean, racists are nice to people who are just like them. For her, believing that moral ideas are grounded in God, and therefore true, makes them much more than just something that is convenient for your own group.
But for many scientists, like Frans de Waal, who don't believe in God, our moral ideas aren't as important as our evolved emotions.
And so do you think that these moral ideas, like taking care of those in the outgroup, are real truths that are out there that we discover, or are they just something that we've kind of made up ourselves?
I don't know about that. I don't know if there's absolute truths in the world.
Okay.
But does it matter for moral behavior whether there are absolute moral truths?
No, I don't think so. I think human behavior is based on emotions and intuitions and social relationships and social strategies. And then the rationalization is something that comes afterwards. So to make that the basis of human behavior or the basis of human morality is a fundamental mistake, I think.
But those are tendencies that have evolved to care for our in-groups, right?
Yeah.
Whereas often the difficult things is caring for those that are not, that are outside of our group.
Well, what we try to do under these circumstances is try to look at at the out-group as if they're sort of an in-group. And nowadays in society with all the internet and the planet has gotten smaller, that's actually easier. So if you hear about the tsunami in Japan, for example, in the old days you would read it in the newspaper. Now you see video images, you see interviews with people who've lost their home, they've lost their children, they're crying on the camera. And as a result you feel closer to them, and as a result you're going to give money or at least you worry about them. And so we are shrinking the world, and we're actually treating out-groups more like in-groups. And the opposite process is, of course, dehumanization, which we also do with certain enemies, is we're going to describe them as horrible and not worthy of consideration. And so we manipulate the image of others.
Yeah, so how do we decide between which of those two manipulations to do?
I feel humanization is always better than dehumanization.
Why do you feel that?
He's empathetic.
He's empathetic.
I'm empathetic, yeah.
So I'm not sure what it is you think's missing.
Well, maybe if you told me, well, I have a duty that way, I might behave that way even when my passions don't push me that way.
On purely rational grounds, I don't think you can solve this issue.
You want it to be grounded rationally, don't you?
I want it to be. I think it's really important. I think it's really important because I think it's not only that if it's grounded, if it's just grounded in our passions, then the minute I realize that that's what it is, I can start manipulating it.
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
So without moral ideas grounded in God, would our feelings towards others be much easier to manipulate?
I don't see why I can't just have my biology, which is good and bad, and then dream up some nice ideas, like people are all created of equal worth.
But the minute you want to say something like torturing children for pleasure is always wrong, you need some kind of other system to explain that, unless you think it's just dependent on the situation. Right? But I don't think you do.
No, I don't. But I would just say, look, matey, torturing children is a bad idea. And if you think it's a good idea, then you and I have a problem. But I'm not going to appeal to anything else.
So then it becomes your power versus my power.
But what's the way out of that?
if you bring in and outside the idea that there are absolute truths or there is a God, it's not because you think that's going to immediately cut through the muddle. It just is a way of demuddling the muddle.
But it doesn't demuddle it.
It does demuddle it somewhat because...
Not for me, sorry.
At least we both agree that there's something out there that we might need to obey. The incentives for me to follow that are
I don't follow
different.
that at all, no. Unless you're saying that the extra reason would be you'd think that some bloke up there was peering over your shoulder and seeing you.
Well, the extra reason would be because I believe it's true, right?
Yeah, but I believe it's true too. I just don't try to...
So you do believe it's absolutely true? But where'd it come from then? So you believe it's absolutely true?
I don't know why you think it needs to come from somewhere.
Yeah, but you can't just make things up.
Why not?
So how do our moral decisions form in our mind? Do they grow simply from our emotions? Or are they shaped by the mind's having access to absolute moral truths?
Do you think there are moral absolutes?
Oh, that's not a science question. I think maybe that's a philosophy question.
For Molly Crockett, morality has to be a mixture of both emotions and ideas.
So you might have one person who says, well, moral judgments are driven by emotions, and you have another camp who says, no, moral judgments are actually really prolonged deliberative process. And I think they can be both. And I think the field is generally moving away from this sort of false dichotomy.
But could you be, do you think, be a moral person if you were perfectly able to think about these deep philosophical moral, this school of moral thought or that school of moral thought, but you had no empathy? In other words, you were lacking these humble instincts.
So,
would you be able to be a moral person, or would you be a monster?
Well, so are you describing a psychopath?
I don't know.
Maybe.
You put the label on. I'm just describing this.
People that
it's just that I get the sense that there's the instincts, and they're somehow a lower thing, and then we get to humans, and there's this fine ability of us to come up with great moral judgments, and I just wonder if we've actually got the importance of the two the wrong way up. Because I think if you had empathy, but you didn't think about philosophical schools of moral thought, you'd probably be an all right person. But I'm not sure you would be if you were lacking the empathy to start with.
Right. I think the moral behavior is motivated, and to have the motivation, you need the sentiments.
You need to care about somebody.
You need to care. So it's certainly the case, just anecdotally, that if you ask a psychopath, a serial killer, do you know that what you did was wrong? They'll say, yeah, I realize it was against the law, and they can apply moral principles. They can tell you what you want to hear, but they don't have that feeling.
It doesn't mean anything to
right? And so you can talk about physics, and you're a physicist, so E equals mc squared. I can tell you that E equals mc squared, but I don't actually understand. Why is the c squared, for example? Whereas you have an understanding, based on your knowledge of physics, that is a much richer understanding of that equation. So similarly, a psychopath can say killing is wrong, and I can say killing is wrong, but our understanding of that statement is very different.
So psychopaths are basically people who understand the rules, but don't have the sentiments to make them follow the rules.
Exactly.
And I think what I'm learning from this and talking to the others, like Frans de Waal, is that these moral instincts are more powerful than people.
Yeah.
And for maybe say philosophically orientated theoretical scientists like myself who like to think about everything.
Exactly.
This is where I think Molly really helped me clarify something, because I think if I say to you, yes, there are moral facts like 1 + 1 = 2, everybody, including myself, gets nervous that I'm going to start becoming doctrinaire and imposing myself on people, actually causing harm.
Yeah.
So what I would really what she helped me think is I do think there are things like 1 + 1 = 2, but I'm not quite sure exactly what 1 is, and quite sure exactly what
Right. But you think there probably are moral absolutes.
Quite exactly what plus is, but I do think that they're there. I do think that I can get better at figuring out what they're like, even though I'm always going to be careful that I haven't quite got it. Right? And the minute I think that I know exactly what 1 is and exactly what 1 is and plus means and I get 2, then I'm going to be nervous, because somehow, even though these things are real, they're just harder to grab. You know, mathematics is easy compared to morality, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, mathematics becomes really easy. So I'm a theoretical physicist. I use mathematics in physics.
And it's rock solid. It's just something you can base things on.
The fact is, physics is a lot easier than morality. A lot easier. Just a lot easier.
That's reassuring.
Yeah. So physics people go, oh, physics is hard. No. Physics is easy. Morality is hard. Yeah. It's hard to know. But the fact that it's hard doesn't mean that the truth isn't out there and there's something that we can look for.
South African physicist George Ellis was, for decades, part of the struggle against apartheid, for which he was awarded the Mandela Star. For him, and many others like him, and Ard also, moral ideas are truths as real as those of physics and mathematics.
Do you think the anti-apartheid movement, this idea that it was wrong and that was a fact, played a big role for those who fought against apartheid?
I think so.
People sacrificed for this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the point about this is exactly that. And I mean, I take someone like Desmond Tutu as being the classic person doing that. For him, it was absolutely not the slightest question that it was an evil, and that this wasn't an opinion, but it was a fact that it was an evil. Yeah.
Just because you can't measure it scientifically doesn't mean that it's not true.
Oh, I think it's true. As I say, I think there's a moral reality. I believe passionately that apartheid in South Africa was an evil. I believe that the Holocaust was an evil. I think that is a fact. That's a moral fact.
And the way that you are describing moral facts, you would have felt that that was a moral fact, that apartheid was wrong, with the same certainty and power as the square root of 4 is 2.
Yes, the fact that it is possible to think of moral thoughts is a very, very deep fact about the universe. The fact it's possible to think that things are good and evil, bad and so on. Real morality is not a set of 10 laws on a tablet which you can write down, because those are a terrible approximation to the real thing. And from my viewpoint, the deep nature of morality, which is discovered by the spiritual members of all the great traditions in the world, is that the deep nature of morality is to do with self-sacrifice and giving up on behalf of other people. It's counterintuitive. It's not a logical argument, and people are looking for logical laws that they can apply. But the deep nature of morality, from my position, is that it is the counterintuitive thing that if you want to get something and create greater good, you must give up. And the way to getting what you want is giving up what you want, and that's the way to get what you want. Science can explain what I would call the lower reaches of morality. It can explain certain behaviors which tend to enable societies to live together. To call that good or bad it's simply it's a wrong dimension. It's not a moral dimension.
If there is a moral dimension where moral ideas and truths exist, then for some, the most rational way to explain their existence is to believe in God.
So one of the things in this film is I believe in God, I'm a scientist, but David is an atheist. So do you think David is irrational?
I think it is a more rational position to actually believe in God than not to believe in God. I find not believing in God slightly irrational.
Why?
It is a very intolerant position, because in some sense you would have to say, I know that in all reality there is no God. How can you possibly know that? You know, I find that very difficult.
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, I would just say I don't believe in him because he hasn't spoken to me. I feel no reason, no need to. I don't say I know he doesn't exist, because I don't.
Yeah, then you're not really an atheist. You know? So an atheist.
What am I then?
Something like on the edge of agnostic. A real atheist sort of knows that God doesn't exist.
No, I don't know that. How could I?
But I think you think it's actually more rational to believe that there is a God than there.
Yeah, you have to say, for me, the reason to believe in God is really very philosophical, also mathematical, if you like. I believe in a universe that makes sense. Things make sense out there. There is the wisdom to study that which makes sense.
But you see, I would agree with that. When I look at the universe, I say this is a universe full of meaning. And then the difference is I don't feel the personal need to say, well, that must be underwritten by God, and I think art does.
I think you're already on the right track. You know, you already say you believe in meaning. So now the next question would be, where does meaning come from? So where does ethics come from? Where does goodness come from?
And where does it come from, Martin?
From God.
From God.
From the fundamental principles.
Yeah, exactly.
It is like from the fundamental principles that are eternal.
Martin, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm feeling in the mind. I don't think I got mine from God, but I don't know.
I think you did.
I know you do.
I'm getting a bit tired of being told that it's irrational to defend the things I believe in without believing in God. Ard and the others seem to need to justify their beliefs by saying they're certain because God told them. I just don't need my beliefs to be certain.
I don't think I'm ever going to get David to become a rational thinker. He just doesn't get that without God, there's only atoms and molecules. And that it becomes really hard to defend ideas like all humans have an intrinsic value. What we both agree on is that science does not answer questions like, what is the value of a human being?
If you're using the word value to mean some ultimate intrinsic value, then the answer is there's no such thing as ultimate intrinsic value, and so either the question is ill-posed or the answer is none.
So I think where Alex and I agree, and we probably disagree with you, is that we both think that if the world is made of nothing but atoms and molecules, then such conclusions are inevitable. I, on the other hand, believe that there is a transcendent reality, a God, and that these kinds of values, like the intrinsic value of a human being, comes from outside the natural world. Right. But I believe that if you don't believe that's true, then I think Alex's logic is impeccable.
Now, I think that if you use the standards of reasoning, which you are accustomed to employing in the sciences, okay, that you cannot come reasonably to the conclusions that you just identified, unless you can provide a good reason why you should cease to employ the principles of logic and the standards of evidence and reasoning that you employ in doing empirical science. When you raise these questions about the nature of value, you're engaging either in sophistry or self-delusion. And I don't think that appealing, for example, to the existence of a supreme being, even if there were one, would help us in any way understand the nature of value.
This is self-delusion, mate.
Just self-delusion, yeah. So basically what you're saying is if I use my logic, I should let go of the idea of God. And even if I have God, the idea that somehow that...
It doesn't help.
Doesn't help me explain why human beings... Yes. Mm-hmm. So even though I believe that God created human beings and therefore their value comes from that, you're saying that doesn't actually help.
I don't see how, even if that Sunday school story were correct, it would help us ground moral value.
Okay. I think I disagree.
I thought you might.
Yeah.
No, so give us an argument.
The argument would be that the morals that we have, well, the value that we have, I think the idea that we're created by God gives us value. Mm-hmm. And that value is partially linked to the goals that God has for us, which are good goals. So all of the moral things that we have are linked.
Wow. This is like, it's hard. I don't know where to start to deal with true theism. You know, I can deal with deism because it's not a serious competitor to the scientific worldview. But theism is actually logically incompatible with a lot of science.
And by theism you mean?
I mean that there is an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and benevolent agency who's responsible for our presence here in the universe.
So he says classic theism is incompatible with science.
Yes. But obviously it's not in some sense, because you've got
you
both.
You can keep both ideas in your head, but that's because we all keep contradictory ideas in our heads. We're not logically omniscient, and these two happen to be particularly obvious examples of incompatible ideas.
So I think it's dangerous?
That many people keep in their heads.
Yeah, well,
and how do they deal with it? Cognitive dissonance, being a bit schizoid in their personality.
But maybe that's a good thing then. I mean, maybe if that's what we do, and maybe that's the way we're evolved, then maybe it's a very good thing that...
Or it might be adaptive, but that doesn't make it true any more than so many other beliefs that we have that are adaptive are not true.
So I think he's on to something. If you start from science, it's really hard to bootstrap your way into some kind of why question. You just, at some point, it all dissolves away. And I think you need something transcendent from outside of science to put that back in.
So this is where we get to it, because are you saying then that if you agree with Alex Rosenberg, that sort of scientific view says you just start with the molecules, and if you're consistent with that and purely scientific, then everything that you care about disappears. And is that why for you there needs to be a God, because that's the only way of bringing that stuff in?
It's the only way that I can think of that's consistent that would bring that back in. We say odd because I think we're brought up in a world of technology and medicine and computers that makes it feel like everything can be described by these little mechanisms.
Well, you weren't brought up there though, were you?
I was brought up in a world of forests and trees and wild things.
Did that have an effect, do you reckon?
I think it does, yeah. If you're brought up in the forest, you can't help but have a kind of spiritual sense. And I don't know if that's where it comes from, but I'm sure it played a role. Now, if you ask me, what was it? Was it the shape of the leaves or the wind? I don't know, but you just feel it. And I'm a scientist, I'm not supposed to say, I just feel it. That sounds very unscientific.
Yeah, I was going to say, you'll get cast out of the fraternity for that.
There is knowledge, like scientific knowledge, where you sit on the outside and you're a detached observer and you look at it and you try to pick it apart. And there is knowledge which you kind of gain by opening yourself up to it and saying, I'm going to try to receive this. And I think in our own lives, relational, like the knowledge about other people, relationships have that nature to them. Our interaction with art or music has that nature to it. And I think our interaction with the spiritual has that nature to it.
But for scientism, our feelings or beliefs, no matter how important they feel to us, are not really truths at all, because they are subjective.
The reductionist and the materialist would say the only truths are those which can be objectively proved. And here I am thinking, well, I can't prove that my children love me, but I'm pretty sure they do.
Yes, it's a very interesting question, this whole objective-subjective distinction, because it's often thought that science deals with hard objective fact, and this other stuff we're talking about is ultimately pretty fuzzy, sort of matter of opinion or subjective conviction. But I don't think that is the right way of putting it. I think, in a way, there are truths that are only accessible if we're prepared to be porous, open, receptive. So there are some genuine realities which can only be accessed if you have the right kind of receptivity. If you always remain hard, detached, the spectator, that very insistence on adopting the scientific detached attitude will cut you off from being receptive to the properties of the other person.
You're saying some evidence is not visible to you, or you can't see it until you take almost like a step of faith.
Yes, you give ground a little bit, and then something becomes visible, which was before occluded. Then as it becomes visible, it has a further effect on you. You undergo further change. And so if things go well, I mean, this is what happens in a relationship. If you go, there's a kind of upward spiral of change where people are prepared to put down their guard increasingly. And as a result, there appear properties of the other person which they might not have seen before.
Once upon a time, in the jungle of Africa, there was a little boy who had a pet chimpanzee. And the name of the chimpanzee was Bertje. Yeah.
One of the greatest ways humans are able to move from the simple instinct of empathy for others to an understanding of ideas about others is through story.
There are not that many ways of getting me to feel what you can feel. They're just not that many. One of the few truly great ways of doing that is story. It is one of the most miraculous things about it. You write a story. One day I went out into the street and I saw this girl, and I'm reading it. I'm not reading it from your point of view. I'm reading it from my point of view. I'm reading it from my consciousness. So the act of reading is an act of automatic empathy. It is literally wearing someone's skin. It is literally entering into someone's consciousness. Forgive these absurd gestures, but it is an immersing into a different, slightly different order of reality. Actually, one quite different from yours. But suddenly you get to see it from someone else, and you think, oh my goodness, is that what that feels like? And that's one of the most powerful places for the birth of the moral sense. Because if we don't know what someone else feels like, why should I care really what I do to you?
The moral sense that comes from caring for others and the sense of meaning that caring brings can be born even in the most meaningless places. Like here in Vacaville Prison, where life means life.
How do we know the moral boundaries of life? How do we know if you live in a place where no one has told you, don't do that, that's going to hurt somebody? How would you know? We only know because people tell us. And even when they tell us, we don't really know. We only begin to know when we can start to feel how the other person might feel.
I was a very selfish person on the street. I only thought about myself. I look back on my life, and it was me, and I don't need anyone else.
They gave me 15 years for kidnapping, carjacking, and residential burglaries. So I was living the fast life, really fast. It didn't matter to me what or who or why. It was just about me the whole time.
I took someone's life, and I received a life sentence with possibility of parole. I've been down 30 years.
So you've been outside today?
I count it as a blessing. I believe I was saved because I was doing some bad things out there, not treating people right, and it ended up in me taking someone's life. So when I came to jail, my life started over there, and I got back in touch with my religious faith, and it's graduated to working here in hospice, and I don't know if you can call it paying back, but I know I'm doing the right thing.
The minute you begin to tell a story, a whole universe comes into being. because every good story brings with it a complete world. Even if it's very short, the implication of a complete world is in there. And that's where the moral structure comes from, because it's given the idea of a complete world. So it brings with it the ideas of the society. It brings with it our perception of how things should be, ideally, how we would not like them to be. All of our ideas about society are implied in the stories that we tell.
Yeah.
The imagination is one of the most extraordinary faculties that we have. It's not an objective faculty, even though it draws its material from the objective. But it's the faculty through which we are able to be slightly more than just ourselves. And for me, storytelling and imagination are very intrinsically bound.
Do you think that has an effect back on us? The telling of a story changes us. You know, do ideas have the power to change the person who...
Absolutely. 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 The teller is changed by the telling. The hearer is changed by the hearing. If the story resonates with you in any way, something has been not given to you or added to you, but awoken in you. Something has been inwardly expanded in you that wasn't there before. I'm even going to go slightly further than this and say that I believe stories affect reality. I believe that the stories that we tell themselves slowly actually change our realities, our possibilities.
All right, buddy. If there's anything you need, you let me know. Okay?
I feel the patients are giving us an opportunity to help them. They all have different needs. They're all in different stages of life. And it gives us an opportunity to get personal and be open with them. It's a blessing.
It's a blessing. And do you think your faith in God helps you with this?
Absolutely. Yes.
Why does it help?
Well, because this is the end of life for them as we know it. But we have a life after this. And I really encourage them to tell Jesus they're sorry. And he'll forgive them. And boy, what a wonderful feeling it is to know that they may be in heaven. And so that's what I'm getting out of it, part of it. We don't do it for the pay.
Yeah. Hey, Mr. Jennings. You look at these guys, this is somebody's father, somebody's son. They're somebody. These guys are somebody, regardless of what they've done in their life or regardless of their crimes. And I look at them as individuals, as patients, not as inmates, because we all need someone to take care of somebody. And taking care of these guys it's an awakening. It's an awakening because I do it because it makes me feel good. It makes me want to be better, and it makes me want to get back.
I feel that I've grown as a person in here. I've seemed to have developed more compassion while I've been here, and truly care about each one of these patients. And the feeling, the compassion doesn't stop when I leave the door. And when I came to prison, that started to change. And when I came into hospice, it really bloomed, yeah.
It gives a meaning to life. It gives a meaning to the spirit, to the soul. Yeah.
And if that wasn't there, would it be more difficult or impossible to feel that there was a meaning?
I think so. I think you'd be empty. You'd be empty. You'd be lost if you weren't connected with your inner soul, your inner conscience, your inner being. I think we'd be lost.
Do you hope that someone will do it for you?
Hey, I see myself on this bed maybe one of these days. Like Chaplin said, I'm 73 years old. I've been down 30 years. Maybe I'll get out, maybe I won't. But if I have to end my life, this is where I want to do it. Because I'm going to get care.
The truths of science are the objective truths of our material universe. But how we understand the truth of human life and death is perhaps what ultimately shapes the questions that we ask and the answers that we seek.
There's no point in worrying about what enjoyment you'll get when you're dead. There's no point in worrying about, what enjoyment you missed before you were born. Meaning is, I think, deeper enjoyment when you are alive. We can see joy and delight and all those things that contribute to the pleasure of being alive. I think it's such a privilege that we should make full use of it. Grasp the moment, carpe diem.
In terms of science, one can hardly blame people for being so enthusiastic about it, because it opens completely new doors into the way the universe is organized. And my only complaint with some of my colleagues is to say, is that sufficient? Everything else I know about the world, including many areas of science, is it's always unfinished business. And I'm just always nervous, and this would apply with equal force to any religious faith as it would to science, to say, everything is being sorted out, I don't have to worry about things. And so the problem is it actually sufficient merely to get some fantastically clever machine which will provide gigabytes of data if in the end we don't actually know what the question is we wish to ask?
Certainty is bad. It means you know already, you don't need to think anymore about it. The thinking you have all the truth is very bad, because then it's a prison. Then we might as well not be alive. What are we here for?